All right, and now I will share my screen and it's going to work. We are all being recorded. It's just in a different way. Where's my Zoom?
You get that 60-inch monitor.
Yeah. Here we go.
We're all this big.
Okay. Now we are all being recorded. Like this.
Michael's monitor is bigger than some rooms I've had for computers before.
Go. All right, cool. All right, everybody. Welcome to the September 3rd, 2022 Tinderbox Meetup. Thank you for joining. The typical format of the meetup is for us to go around the room and see who's new. Those who are new can introduce themselves. We then ask people to talk about what projects they're working on or if they have any specific topics of interest that they want to address. And then we dive into the program agenda. And today I had one about teaching with Tinderbox. So in weeks past when we haven't stuck to our agenda, we don't actually get to the agenda until 10 minutes before the session's over. So hopefully today we can get through the preambles pretty quickly and then jump right into the agenda. And we'll use the agenda as a means to answering people's questions. So with that in mind, who's got what's going on and who wants to give some introductions? Go for it.
Hi, this is my first time joining. I've watched all the recordings that have been published, and so I've been following, so I feel like I know everybody. But my name is John Wilkins. I'm a retired math professor. I still teach one course online, and that's the history of math. I submitted a question last year about a grade book that was answered by Michael. And now I've got another problem that I put into the chat. Please don't address it now. It's quite long. Mark A helped me clean up some of the data, double checking it. I've got 22 or almost 2,200 records, notes of students and their performance on a single test item. And the test items are categorized by course learning outcomes. So I want to know how to use Tinderbox to pull out scores for each student by a course learning outcome, of which there are 8 of those outcomes. So that's the project I'm working on. Again, I'm really interested in the topic of the presentation, so I don't want to take up a lot of time looking at that.
Yeah, I'm actually, but just so you know, what did I do with that demo? I'm actually really interested in your project and what you're working on, so I definitely want to dig deeper into that with you at some point. Because I think it's really
that'd be great.
I think it's really an interesting one, and I may need some of Mark's help on the side when doing that because I'm trying to find out where I did it because I got partially.
I'm sorry I winked out of that thread. I just didn't have any time to go further.
But I can show you where I've thus far if you're looking at my screen right now. So one interesting idea is with what you're doing there, John, is I was able to figure out how to run some agents to pull out and actually get, here's learning objective 1, 22 students took the quiz. There were 9 items to each objective, and then the score of 122 applied to that objective. So that was one kind of method, and I can walk you through how I got there. The other one's a little harder to do that, and I'd love to see your raw data because I'm trying to guess what your data input is. So if you have an example of your data that you could send, it would be a lot easier to do it.
I think I suspect Michael's mind was going the same way as mine. I was thinking, wait a minute, if I had the source spreadsheet for this, I might have just changed the input.
Correct.
I mean, it's all work. The question is where in the process you do it. Sometimes, and invariably, on the day it really matters, you find that actually if you change something further upstream, it would have made it easier further downstream. But that's all part of learning.
Yeah. So John, I just gave you my email address. If you want to shoot me your like an example of your raw data, I can then figure out what we can do with it because I kind of want to solve the same problem for my own purposes.
Great, I'll do that.
All right. We have another new guest, Drew Claves. Hey, Drew. Who are you?
Hello, everyone.
What are you doing?
Good. I'm great. How are you?
Good. So
I'm looking forward to learning more about Tinderbox with my first session. Nice to meet everyone.
perfect. And just so you all know, Drew is my nephew, and I've indoctrinated him into the process. I've hired him recently, and I've forced him to adopt Tinderbox as part of our business processes. So he will be in joining us and becoming my marketing director in short order. So I'm pretty excited about it.
Welcome. That's awesome.
Thank you. I'm looking forward to it.
All right. Any other topics, comments, questions that people have?
Excuse me. So I'm Win Treese. I've been here a few times. Just wanted to make a couple of. I'm starting a new project that I'm actually using Tinderbox for at the very beginning stages, which is organizing some ideas along the theme of what every computer science student should know about security. And it's a big topic. There's a lot of interrelationships and dependencies and things. So I just thought it would be an interesting sort of trial thing. And there's a particular sort of source archive for some material that using some of the techniques I've been picking up in this is an interesting way to pull that in and split it up into sort of component pieces, because it's probably structured enough to do that. And also last week, I had to leave right at the end and didn't get a chance to say anything about it, but I dropped a link in the chat. I recently published a collection of poems that some of which touch on technology or math or science, and a few other things, but they're sort of mostly in that theme. It's available in both ebook and print, and it's just kind of cool to have it out there.
Okay,
So
by the way,
I'll tell you about it.
I'm late to the chat. Can people drop in, or can you re-drop in whatever you said?
Sure, it was last week, so but I'll put it in again.
Got it. Yeah, got it. So all right. So awesome. What else?
I started talks for the recording started about, and basically, I guess what it is, it's using HTML, CSS to produce, in preview mode, tables or other things. And my general question is, what exactly are the limitations of the CSS, what do you call it, the render engine or whatever it is that's in Tinderbox? I mean, I understand it's not like a complete CSS product as you can do, can do the complete functionality of writing a CSS file with accessibility code and other things. But I was just curious to know.
So to fast forward to your question, my experience is so I think the point you're trying to raise is the preview in Tinderbox is not a browser. So
Yes.
very clear. And that's the most important thing to say. And so what is a browser? A browser is an application with a ton of technology capabilities.
Yeah.
So for example, the video I did last week, somebody was asking like, how do I use the arrow keys to navigate through a YouTube video? Well, guess what? Just so you know, even browsers can't do that. The reason why why a Chrome browser can allow you to navigate through a YouTube video is the browser is capable of embedding the application that is YouTube in the browser, and then the YouTube video is surfacing up the keyboard controls to be able to navigate through the browser. So there's kind of layers of application that happens within a browser that is not Tinderbox. So with that in mind, the way to think about Tinderbox is it's a pure HTML display. That's the best way I can explain it. And so if you've got really clean CSS, really clean HTML, or even not so clean because it gracefully fails for you, it's going to display your CSS in your HTML tables. It can also do very simple JavaScript because the scripting language is embedded within the HTML, and so therefore the HTML can execute on it itself. So think about kind of anything that can be handled internally within the JavaScript or the HTML. The preview should handle it. That includes, for example, embedding iframes to be able to pull videos from a web source. That would be an example of that. Anything that requires application logic beyond embedded application logic, not going to happen in preview, because that's all of the layers that a browser would enable to happen. And then, like I shared with my video last week, that's actually not a limiting issue. All you need to do is reframe your context and say, well, what happens if I had a Tinderbox file sitting next to a browser, and then I could do my work back and forth. So there's ways around that.
The concrete case that I was just playing around with sort of tables, CSS. I was using, from the file exchange, some of your files Michael, with using attribute values to create the table. I also just found a nice old article on the internet looking at some of the principles of designing tables. I've got his, Edward Tufte, the man who's written those books about presenting of language. And I was just going through that, and they've got one interesting thing where they talk about using, having the table selector and then using a selector called font variant numeric. So you can then have tabular numbers rather than just having when you have number data in a cell, rather left, center, or middle, and with that you can then align it centered around the decimal point or the comma in your numbers. It didn't seem to work in Tinderbox, and in the notes I've got here it says for legacy browsers, it wouldn't be font variant numeric that I'll be using, it'd be font feature settings with an L-num and T-num. And so this is really the question. At what point can I assess, okay?
CSS, your thing is, all this is CSS, which is really nothing to do with Tinderbox per se. It's all to do with what you want to do, and you can write the CSS in Tinderbox. But just to save yourself confusion, it can't be stressed strongly enough. So that the preview gets so many people so confused because you are not looking at a web browser. It originally came in so that you could, instead of running out lots of pages when everything was slower and things sort of 20 years back, you could see roughly what the non-interactive parts of your web page looked like before you exported it, and it stayed. The next sort of way it grew was there were people who couldn't live. There are people who can't live except in an RTF world. So unless text is styled, it's code and they can't deal with it. And that's fine. So people got very excited about what they wanted to do was to write their style sheets and be able to see their notes styled as if it was in a web page instead of the normal text view. Then Markdown arrived and people said, I can't read my Markdown. I need to see it rendered. So that came. And that led to yet another confusing factor, which is that there is a mode you can sort of do a form of PowerPoint-like presentation in preview, but I'm not going to go down that rabbit hole today. But again, I say this to make the point that it is not, don't try and write things to work in the preview. Use preview. In fact, I see what I do with Michael is don't look at the preview, look at the code first, the export code. Because the thing is, actually, if you're trying to understand how it works, you'll learn far more by looking at the HTML, which, as someone who's never had any formal code training, I've just picked up along the way, it's actually easy to learn. And it's a lot easier to learn now than it was in the early 90s before they finished writing it. But generally, I think you'll find that easier. But the styling things you're talking about, how a table looks, that's your friend. Yep. And once you've worked out the CSS you want, then you can write it in basically in a code note or something in Tinderbox, attach it to your template, however, and then you will find that whether you look at it in the preview window of Tinderbox or exported, that should fix your problem.
Okay, because long-term plan is to start doing a lot of work with tables, because I've got lots of attributes that I want to populate with data, but once they're just in the attribute sort of display attributes, there's not a lot you can really do with that to work with that. So I quite like this idea, using the populated attributes to create the actual table in export code. And so that's where the question comes from.
Yeah. Well, just bear in mind that it's getting a bit ahead of where you are, that probably if you're heading down that route, you probably want to learn how to generate tables, so using something like JavaScript on the fly. So what you actually give the page is just take literally like a spreadsheet, like a plain text table, tab delimited or CSV.
Perhaps
the page reads that and renders your thing, because otherwise tables have been a nightmare since the dawn of HTML, and you're about to dig a big deep mine in one of the worst resource parts of the thing. To save you that. So once you've figured out the sort of tables you want to do, I'd look at ways that you could probably pass a data table to a web page and then have the whole thing just generated.
So let me show you an example of that. So in terms of CSS and tables, so you can use typical table tags and HTML to make a table. You can also make tables with style sheets with CSS. So if you think about my content structure, appearance, methodology, and then the structure and appearance making up design, I put the fact that CSS is both structure and appearance, right? And most people want to see CSS appearance because 80% of the time that's what it is. But as you get more advanced with CSS, you realize that you can actually use CSS as layout for your web page, which is predominantly used for like responsive design web pages development for mobile, right? And so CSS then also has the ability to give you structure too. It's a bit of a more advanced concept, but let me show you a bit of what you're talking about here in building tables. So here I've got a note, a folder that's got a bunch of terms, and I'll go ahead and just delete a bunch of these so I don't have to have them all in here. So here I've got a folder that's got a handful of terms, now 19 of them. And essentially, if you go through here, the term's got a title. The term may have a URL. When I copy these over, I didn't have. I literally just put this together on the fly. So they may have URLs. They may have categories, themes, other things you want to be using for categorizing your terms. But what you want to do here is you essentially want to say, I want to build a table. I basically want to do this, right? Have Tinderbox render me a table for this. And so if I go in here and I give it the term, right? And I go like that, you'll see term, description, there's my term, and it can get a lot fancier. For example, if there's a URL, it would say see this URL, and I can actually show you that example. So let's see, in this case, because I just copied it over, I'll go like this and I'll say www.eastgate.com, just so I have the URL in there. And now if I render the term, voila, all of a sudden it says now see eastgate.com, right? So you may ask yourself, how is that automatically happening? Well, let me show you. It's pretty simple, actually. So you build a top level element of the table that says, give me a table row, give me the headers of the table, and here you see where I'm saying type value. So I'm feeding the value from the type attribute to be able to populate that first cell in the table. So if you notice when it said terms, the first cell was empty, and then when I added the word terms, it populated with terms. That's where that's coming from. And then I add description, and now I'm calling yet another table that says go build my table. So let's go see what this is doing. So this, when it's it's going to start interrogating all of the children to go interrogate the children. So in this table, let's see what it's doing. It's basically saying run some action code, and then when you're done running that action code, stick it into a table, right? And so let's look what the action code basically is saying, and we can walk through this more in the future. But essentially what it's saying is, for every one of the items, I want you to wrap it around its HTML path if you can. So the reason why I do this cross-referencing is and sometimes in my tables, I'll add another table saying, where in this document is this reference? So that way I actually have an interactive table of contents. So I could say this term shows up in the document in these 5 different places. That's what this cross-reference functionality is here. And then I essentially am saying now, so you can ignore all of that for now, and then basically now it's going to say, build me a new row for each one of the individual items, take the short title of that item and make it the term, and then I'm saying, go do yet another process. And let's go see what that other process is telling me to do. It's saying, give me an include that it says include this item, and then what template do you want me to use when including this item? I want you to include the resource table include. So now I go look at that, and essentially what I'm doing here is because of the way I've structured my items, I want to be able to make the first character uppercase or lowercase because of different situations. And now I'm essentially saying, go out and build me the table element that I'm gonna the values that I'm gonna stick in that cell for that description. So I'm saying, grab me the title of the note. First, stick in the caption for the table. Grab me the title for the note, and then I want you to go through. And that's actually this. I actually broke this one. I don't need that here. That's the wrong place for that actually. go ahead and grab the short title for the note, grab its acronym if it exists, and then stick in the text and then stick in that where it says C URL. That's where this is coming from. So now if we go back and look at our table, you can see that's how we generate all of that. And I'm getting some errors here because because I'm missing my T render table template here because that's being called too. So I'll go here and drop that in. Now if I go back, there you go. And so you'll see essentially what that's doing is all those three little cascading templates are essentially build me the table structure, grab the name of the first column here, so that can be different for different folders, grab the name of that child note, and then go process what you want me to do with that actual description of the child note. And so that's how you can dynamically build tables. And then you can get super fancy by turning on and off Booleans and have stuff added, have another column added to actually show referencing and that kind of such. But that's the basic structure that you would want to use for like really kind of making it easy and building easily dynamic tables. Hopefully that's helpful.
Yeah, thank you.
Yeah. Later you can watch the video and scan, grab the code and
Yep.
do it.
Thank
But I think this is a really powerful and really important concept that we want to talk about as we think about getting into using Tinderbox. Remember, in Tinderbox, every note has every attribute associated with it, whether or not it's displayed or not. And at the end of the day, a note is nothing more than the gravitational force of two primary attributes, which is name and text. Right? And then, so that constitutes a note. And then any attribute on top of that essentially can be then pulled out. And so as you start grasping that idea that a note, that essentially Tinderbox is nothing more than a primordial sea of attributes at your disposal to be able to repurpose and re-render and display in any way, shape, or form you want with action code and templates, then the power of Tinderbox really comes forth. And we'll be talking about that a little bit more in today's kind of teaching with Tinderbox lesson. So we digressed.
Michael,
we digressed a little bit. Well, was that helpful? I'm sorry. Someone had a question.
Yeah, Michael, just one quick question. Above your toolbar there, where it says "edited" under TBXL,
Here
I have a bad habit of hitting Control Q instead of Control W, and I might have 3 or 4 Tinderbox files open. What happens if they're in edited?
Tinderbox, I found my experience is Tinderbox saves everything before closing. I very rarely ever lose anything. Sometimes if I've got like 7 Tinderbox files open, all running hundreds of various edicts simultaneously, I'll get impatient and I'll do a force quit, and then I may lose like the last 10 seconds or 20 seconds of some notes I created. But that's about as much as I tend to ever lose. And that's a forced error on my part, not on Tinderbox's part. It's just I'm abusing it.
Coming from Windows in the corporate side, all of a sudden Word just crashes and you don't really know what is the state of your document.
Well, on that note, by the way, too, and let me show you another really great thing to be aware of. Now, I've only had to do this twice in like 3 years, but the idea of being able to do it is incredibly comforting. So you know how you're using that Word file, Word crashes, and your entire document you've been working on for two hours is completely gone, and you have no idea where it is. And if you're lucky enough, you'll have gone online to figure out how to drive into the libraries folder of the Word application into a really scary place of your Mac that you don't want to go into because you're afraid you're going to delete a file and destroy your whole operating system. And then eventually you end up finding this archive thing that's stuck in a Microsoft Word application support folder that may or may not have some copy of the file you had been working on sometime within the last 2 hours. And that could have either been the last 10 minutes or an hour and a half before. And you'll try to recover whatever you can.
Ouch.
Worst case scenario, well, I mean, I don't know if you, but if anybody that's used Word has probably experienced that at least once or twice in their life. The great thing about Tinderbox is the worst case scenario when all hell breaks loose. If you need to open up a Tinderbox file, you can, just pulling up BB Edit, and it will come up in just a second. and here is all of your data. Now, granted, it's wrapped around XML files or XML tags, but all of your data is here. It's clean, it's copyable, it's ready to go. And so if you ever end up needing to like pull something out of a Tinderbox file, you can very easily.
Awesome.
What I recommend doing though is copy the file before you do that, because you may break something in the structure. But that's the great thing about Tinderbox is everything is open. So you don't have that, because if you've unzipped a Microsoft Word file and you open up that, it's a hellacious mess. It's a whole bunch of encryption code and other kinds of nasty stuff that is pretty much unintelligible.
And that's quite pertinent, that fix method. I mean, a number of times people have sent Mark Bernstein a file and he's sent it straight back, said they're fixed. The major cause of gremlins creeping into the data is copy and pasting from the web. So most of us have been doing this for a while, have learned to always use copy and paste style, which basically means that you're not importing any style from, because you most of the times you don't want it, but you just end up with sort of kitty litter of everything in a different color and shape and font and whatever. And normally, riding along for free will be some weird miscoded bit of something that doesn't even render on the screen, that will eventually, which will be fine until you close the file and reopen it. At which point, Tinderbox said, "I'm now confused. I'm not going to open this file." And you're thinking, "My world has ended." But that method will normally allow you to
and give me an example of that. I was working on a really, really complex project, and I'd done exactly that. I copied code over from the web, and I happened to bring over some arcane XML flag, non-visible XML character that and had pasted into my note, and then my file no longer opened. And I'd been working on it for a couple days, and it freaked me out. And Mark was on vacation, and it had nothing to. It wasn't Tinderbox's fault, although Mark has since fixed it, because he actually commented to me, "I had no idea that character was actually copyable from the web. Now that I know, I'll make sure that doesn't happen again." But I was able to open up the XML of the file, grab the elements of that Tinderbox file I needed, pasted it into a new Tinderbox file, and within 20 minutes, I was back to where I needed to be.
Wow.
Right, and you could never do that with a Word file.
And Mark, the copy with style, that's the.
Oh, sorry. It's
Command Shift Option.
Command
V,
Option Shift. Yeah, it's.
Yeah, Command Option Shift V.
It's V3 with the V.
Yeah.
And it'll save you a lot of angst generally. I mean, where it's driven me now is I just don't style text in at all, unless there's some pressing need. But then again, this rather depends. If you're writing for export, then you definitely don't need it, because you can do most of it bar some inline, bold, and italic during export. It's slightly different if this, for instance, you're just working, say you're doing some academic referencing notes or something on a subject you're studying. You're never really going to export it. Then it's obvious that you might want the text that you see in the text pane to have some style to help you read it. So in other words, there's no one right way. But certainly if you're doing something that's taking you down the line of you're going to have to export it at some point, I keep the text as clean as possible in terms of extra markup and coloring and stuff.
Yeah.
That becomes muscle memory after a while. Control
Shift
or Command Shift.
It does. So for
Option
example, I've just copied this table from another document, and so I brought in all of the HTML structure into that, and so if I wanted to render that out, it would be kind of difficult to do. And so I can go back in here, and so there's all the HTML structure. If I wanted to go just delete that and do Shift Option Command V, I can get that, and now I've got the text, and then it'll make it a lot easier to parse it out.
Yeah.
Quite a few Mac, certainly things like text edit. So quite a few Mac apps will have that same thing, whether they advertise it or not. We'll probably follow that method.
Thank you.
Yeah. All right. Before we jump into our kind of thoughts around teaching with Tinderbox, anybody other have any comments, questions, thoughts, ideas? Yeah.
I got one quick question, which is really what we were kicking about as you came in, but it's a sort of help me help you thing for ATB Ref, and that's if probably the forum's as good as place as any, but in the notes that describe what action code operators do, if you want, collect group of something, do something to it. If there are things that just don't make sense, where you think I've stated something that implies, you had to infer something, or you knew something needed to be inferred, but you couldn't guess what it is. I'd really like to know, because I'm trying to work on tidying up sort of 18 years worth of sort of the terminology going all over the place, and trying to bring some sense to it. So I'd really welcome knowing if there are any bad examples, and don't worry, you don't have to be sort of polite in the sense. I really want to know if it doesn't make sense, because the whole point of the thing is to be usable by people, especially those who are starting out with the application. I mean, there's obviously in an app this deep, there's an element of learning to do, but basically, if there's something where there's broadly a common format being used, but you don't understand what the format is, i.e. there isn't an explanation somewhere, that's really useful to know, because I can then begin to write an article about that, link all the documents to it, and then you can go and read it. You'll probably read it once or twice, and then you'll know and understand. Job done. But the further you get down the writing process, the harder it is to spot what you already know as being problematic. So up to you guys. Thank you.
All right, what's next? Want to jump into some of the thoughts or ideas I had? All right, let me go ahead and I just had another one grading. All right, so I prepared a file to kind of walk us through some ideas. Now I have a more robust file, but unfortunately that one's got student data in it. So I got buried with work this week. So what I did was I pulled together this morning, elements of the core file that I've been using to teach with Tinderbox, and I think as we go through this conversation over the next 40 minutes, it's going to highlight some really unique tips and tricks that will be useful. By the way, if you guys wouldn't mind, if we at some point identify a tip or trick that you thought was uniquely cool, can we start the convention of someone in the community dropping it into the chat? Because then that would allow, I'll be able to do then is be able to start correlating your chat timestamps with the topics we're talking about. And then that will also help me as I'm writing up the notes for what we discussed in meetups. It will remind me what we talked about. So you basically, I'm going to talk about stuff and then you help me document what we're talking about. I guess that's my request. And then again, jump in, and it's okay if multiple of you chime in with the same kind of tip and trick comment, because then that emphasizes that that's actually a really useful one. So let's go ahead and jump in. So the goal of by the way too, this is Mark, you got to help me out with this one too. I don't know why this is happening. There, at some point there is a tagger that is flagging some of my text. This has happened to me a couple of times where it's interjecting the stylet of no. And I don't know where the tagger's coming from. So maybe we can talk about that offline. We're not going to deal with it now, but this is the second time I've seen it from a brand new file when I've pasted something in, and all of a sudden I'm getting this highlighting formatted interjected into the file.
Yeah, that'll be a tagger at work, but as you say, that's probably not a rabbit hole.
Yeah, let's not try to solve it right now. But it's funny. It's a gremlin that pops up every once in a while. So I did not intentionally have these no's in here. That's being interjected. So the goal for this lesson is kind of talking about what it is or what we can do or how we can teach with Tinderbox. And there's a number of different thoughts or ideas that we can do with this. So for example, managing announcements, managing your action items, managing your speakers, and all of these different concepts. And then over a while, I'll start building out this key takeaways, and I'm already thinking about some things that I need to build into this particular demo that I haven't, such as using the linking functionality we've talked about before to link if we have time today, we can actually do it, to link your course learning objectives to each of the different items or modules, so you can keep track of that and such. But I'll come back to that later. What did I have here down in the concepts? Oh yeah, and then the key concept that I wanted to convey as I think about doing these kind of programs is try to manage everything in one place. So when you're doing this kind of writing, you're doing this kind of programs, if you've got learning objectives for your course, write those learning objectives in one place and then either use aliases or agents or some other method to resurface those in the right place within your course. And let me give you an example of that concept right now. So, or let's do it methodically here. So if you think about, you're going to go teach a course, and again, this is not just about teaching. If you think about it, at some level, we're all teachers, whether or not you're a business executive. If you're a business executive, you're teaching your executives why what you're doing is important and why you need them to give you money and funding to go do something. If you're managing your team, you're teaching them how and what you want them to do. You're giving them assignments and asking them to go do it. So this framework of teaching is critically important, and frankly, I think propagates across everything we do. Just in the context, the semantics change sometimes. So first and foremost, let's talk about like who are our students. Who is, in other words, who is our audience? And if you're taking a class, you'll tend to have a waitlist audience and you'll have student audience. So let's say your class caps out at 30 people. In this case, I have 5. You have the people that have registered for the class, and then you'll have people that are desperately getting into your class, but because you're such an awesome teacher, you're such a great manager, they want to work for you. And so you're going to park them into this waitlist area, and then you'll approve them or not. So a few things that using the person prototype, what do you need to know about them, their name, their other kinds of information. We can interrogate that later. One thing that I've started to do, and which is really common when you're teaching, is typically, and let me pop down to where did my assignments go? Lecture outline resource folder. Here, my graded items. One of the very common, first assignments in nearly any class you do is in a discussion board, provide a self-introduction, engage in the following discussions, tell us a little bit about yourself, and some of the questions that you may want them to have asks are, how long have you been at the school? Sorry, this is one of the areas when I'm teaching at the school. Right? What is your current occupation? What motivates you? What are your passions? What do you experience? I'm teaching mobile marketing, so that's where that class is coming from. That comment is coming from. What do you hope to gain from this class? So those are really common things that might be the first assignment you ask your students to do on day one, so you can get to know them. What I figured out, and let me pop up another story here as I think about this. By the way, this is another convention I use when I'm doing this type of work. Is in the past, I would get really distracted and allow myself to chase down that rabbit hole and go do something else. And then I go back and then I realize, I never actually finished what I was really originally doing. So what I've started to do is develop a convention called stories. And in software development, the story development is an agile methodology for the work that you want to do and the place that you want to scope it. And so the idea that just popped in my head while I was talking is create TBX export to be able to import TBX into Canvas, right? So one of the things that I've been wanting to do with my my teaching methodologies here is Canvas, for example, or Blackboard, or any number of different, or other LMS, right? Or teaching has really gone down to this path of using online LMS systems. Well, online LMS systems are nothing more than glorified web management pages, glorified blogs, and so keep this in mind. One of the things that I've used and learned from using all my materials in Tinderbox, and I'll show you this in a second, is I can copy the HTML or the preview export out of Tinderbox and paste it right into the learning management system, right? And so I can demonstrate that for you in just a second. So that's a really useful thing. Because Tinderbox has an export and learning management systems have import, taking the appropriate effort, we could actually export out of TBX Canvas or Blackboard formatted copy to be able to import your entire class into a learning management system. I'm absolutely convinced that can happen. I just don't have the time to figure it out yet. So the idea here then is, and so my point being is when the idea pops in your head, this is one of the great things about Tinderbox. The idea pops in your head, you can go over here, capture it somewhere, put it down, leave it, and then go right back to where you were working on, and you'll know you'll not lose that idea. So that's a really effective methodology for teaching as well. So let's say you're on the first night in your first class, you've introduced this assignment, tell me a little bit about you. What I've started to do is you'll notice here in my student profiles, I have interests, I have learning goals, I have their areas of expertise. So as they're telling me stuff about themselves, I populate that in there. So I know they like music. I know they like sports. I know this student is into travel. I know this, and I'll show you what I mean by these roles in just a minute. I know this student's into cooking, hanging out with friends. So it helps me get a sense of what I'm able to do. And then based on what Philip and all of us were just talking about a few minutes ago, I've actually rendered up a table that pulls the attributes of student interests so that the second class, I can say, hey, by the way, here's everybody's interests in the class, just so you know. So, David, you like music. Elsie, you like music too. You guys might want to talk about that on the side. So it's a really nice way of circling back the insights that you're learning about your students back to the students in a really an effective way, just by using that kind of table functionality that Philip was sharing with us earlier. Similarly, you can grab their aspirations, namely, what do they want to get out of the class? Like they could say, skills for my job. And the current class I'm teaching at Cal Poly, it's very interesting. 80% of the interests from students obviously are very clear. Skills for my job. That's what I want to get. And it really kind of helps reinforce what you want to learn or why you want to learn. But then some of them are being more tactically specific. I want to learn about mobile advertising, or I want to learn about how to build a mobile app. Capturing that information at that moment when you're reviewing and learning about the student does two things for me. One, the very factor of me copying it from their survey form out of the learning management system into their Tinderbox profile helps reinforce my learning with that student. The mechanics of me populating fields about them reinforce my learning about the student. Likewise, it lets me go back and do analytics on the class later on what they're doing. So that's a really useful thing for me. The other thing that I've started to do is, you might have noticed when I opened up this, is I've created this prototype called roles. And invariably, students aren't just students. More often than not, they're working, or they've got other activities in their lives, or they're volunteers. And so rather than artificially or bundling them into a company and saying they work for this company and then having this spiraling out, what I've done is I've developed a method where I can actually produce note rolls for them. So student, mid, last name. There's a part-time at Jersey Mike's. They're also a business major at XYZ University. I can also create another role for them where I say this, and I'll say like, animal assisted happiness, and they are a volunteer, right? And so now I can get a sense of that, and then I can click update. And now I can see that, I can see the multiple factors of that individual and what the different roles they are in doing in life. And I don't know why this isn't working. Let me double check. I think I probably just didn't bring, because I just copied and pasted a lot of this. This will give you an example of is name parse. That's what's missing. Let's see, rule. Let me go back to my other file because I want to show you something really cool. I just can't show you because of the confidentiality of it. I just got to see where my role parser rule is. Can't remember how I did that. Did I do it in a where did I do that? Just a second. Let me debrief this. P role. Go like this. Okay. I'll have to find what I did with the linking code later. Or we can just make it up right now on the fly. So I'll just show you how to code this right on the fly. So here I've got all of these different roles. And if you look here, I've got, I can, oh, and then, let me delete these. Because I was testing and I got a number of examples of that. So here, watch what happens. What we're going to do is, so I've got these roles here, and I can go ahead and link these roles, and I've got action code that does it automatically. But you can watch the manual process here. So what I've done is I've essentially linked each one of these roles with the individual student, and you'll see this student is now linked to those 3 roles. And then what you can do here is you can add action code to your prototype, where you could say roles equals links dot inbound dot role links dot inbound dot role. Come on. Dot call it like organization. Right. Now, by doing that, what I'm now able to do here, if I come back here and I can see now the person's role is with Animal Assisted Happiness, Jersey Mike's, and XYZ University. So, and I can't do it right now because I don't want to waste the time, but one of the things you can do when you're doing that links action is you can actually start building a database about it. So it'd be, what I'd really want to have happen here in my action code is Animal Assisted Happiness : their title. And so now in their top level note of the student note, I can see all of the different jobs they have. And this, frankly, I'm starting to adopt all of my files to this methodology. Prior to even as like a week and a half ago, what I tend to do is I'd have a folder called companies, and then I put people underneath their company. And I'm now since going away from that because I'm finding that people have multiple roles. They're not just related to their companies. And so I have a folder now called people, and I'm putting all of the roles, and I've got another folder called companies, and I'm putting all of their roles that they have underneath the person. And so then I can then run queries on that and break it out. Give me everybody that's this kind of job. Give me everybody that's linked to or working with this kind of company. I just find that really a very effective Tinderbox-esque type methodology. Let me pause there for a second. Thoughts, ideas? What's your reaction when you see that?
You don't have a common database of those companies that you're drawing from for any file. You're having to recreate it for each file.
Correct, but what I tend to do though is the nice thing about it too is I have in my linking functionality. If you go back to one of my previous linking folders, I've got a concept called entity or company, and if I actually add a term to a note or a company to a note in its entity folder, Tinderbox will actually go create that note for me. So I find that Tinderbox, I can have Tinderbox recreate a lot of structure for me on the fly.
And that's per Tinderbox file, or
Yes.
Is that something you can draw from in any Tinderbox file?
Well, you can't. The Tinderbox files are independent, right? There's no real watch folder for one Tinderbox file to another. That's one thing that Chuck and I have been talking about, and others, is now that we're getting more advanced with our Tinderbox work, might there be call it a centralized library Tinderbox where here's my companies, here's that. Is there a way to have a Tinderbox file reference that kind of, we'll call it the library file for things like companies and people and things like that? There's been some requests for that over to Mark, but I don't think we've been really clear with him exactly what we want or how we want it to work. So I'd really encourage us, if we, as a community, if we see the value of having that more kind of like common resource file that other files could draw upon, we should start scoping that out and asking them how we might want that to work. Yes, Mr. Bill.
Just because you asked about questions, I'm just anticipating one that I hope you'll get to.
Mm-hmm.
Let's just suppose that there are 20 students and during the course of a semester, there are 10 quizzes. That's 200 entries of individual grades. And within this sort of structure, I'm just sort of curious how you're going to collect information. You're going to want to know about the quizzes. You're going to know about summary for each student, so you can come up with a final grade. But you've got tons of data that this is going to need to explode to, and I'm just curious how you're going to deal with that and I know I'm early because it's further down in your workbook, but that's a curiosity that's looming for me.
Well, we've already addressed that previously in a grading with Tinderbox video like a year ago.
Okay.
And so we certainly can pull that in. I didn't bring it in.
I'm not, if it's there, that's fine.
Yeah, I know. I mean, eventually I do want to pull it into this comprehensive model. I didn't bring it in for today because a lot of nuances in doing that, but we've done that before. Yeah, Mr. Anderson?
Okay.
Just a quick one. It was a question in the sidebar from John asking, I think he was referring to a little orange error blob that we're seeing on screen. That little thing occurs if you've got something like an action code, a rule, an edict or something that basically Tinderbox can't parse, can't understand, or if you've assigned a template, export template to a note and the note that template doesn't exist. And there's Michael's just showing you. Don't worry about it unduly. And the reason it's cropping up here is he's pulled lots of stuff in to create this demo, and one or two connected bits have probably fallen by the wayside. But that's its purpose. I'll stick a note in the sidebar to an ATBRF article explaining a bit more about it so you can get comfortable with what it means.
Yep, that's exactly what that's for. Okay, so that kind of gives you an idea that I've been thinking about in terms of managing students, managing student relationships. The next thing that I've been using is obviously when you're communicating with your students, using announcements through the LMS or sending them emails is really helpful, and you want to keep track of those, especially in where this format or this method I'm showing you really excels is when you're going to teach a class multiple times, because you can, as you're writing announcements that for that first time, by the end of because I just started teaching this class. Here's an example of a first view I had. By the time I'm done with this class 12 weeks from now, I'll have probably 50 or 60 announcements. I'll be able to then know when I did those announcements, what week I did those announcements in, and essentially I have had my announcements pre-written for the next class. And the problem with doing Tinderbox solely in the learning management system that the school provides you is there's a number of issues. One is you're locked into their environment. Two, it makes it very difficult to work on your class independent of being online with the student system. And then three, it's your stuff, so you should have your own archive and to be able to make revisions of it and all of that. So let me give you an example of an announcement. Hey everybody, welcome. This is going to be a great class. Next announcement. Hey, first assignment's due this week. And you notice I'm capturing when I create a new announcement, I just go like this. Give it its prefix and say new announcement. Now, and then I'll drop in whatever I want to talk about, right? And if I'm posting it immediately, I'll do it at this posted or scheduled. And if I did it just right now, I'll say now. And that just tells me this is the moment and second I did it. If I'm going to do it later, let's say I want this to go out next week, right? I'm going to say, hey, I've scheduled in my LMS system for this to go out on 9/5/2022 at 10 a.m. And so that way I kind of have a record of what I did in my Tinderbox. So when I'm teaching, I have this Tinderbox teaching with Tinderbox file sitting right by my LMS. And so I'm kind of going back and forth between the two systems so that I'm both updating what the students are seeing in the learning management system, but I'm also maintaining my own record. Now, there's some other really cool things, and actually surprisingly that I really enjoy doing this. a couple days ago, I was teaching my students about this whole idea of design thinking and being empathetic with your user. Keeping in mind, especially if you're teaching, you absolutely want to be academic about the way you're teaching, so aka use citations. But I would argue increasingly, and I think I finally converted Tom on this. It took me a year and a half or two, but I think we're finally there, that even business professionals should get in this habit of using citations and knowing the provenance of their insights and their work and when they're writing things, because it just makes you sound, you just come, one, you're more credible to your audience, and two, you're giving your future self a massive amount of benefit, because you're going to forget where you got that idea, or you're going to forget that source, and you're going to save yourselves an enormous amount of time taking the 10 seconds it takes to write the citation down versus the hour it's going to take you to find that source a week from now. So the more you get into this process, it's a really important and unique idea. So here's a wonderful thought and thought process. And the other thing too is, what I did here is I started to think about other ideas. So when I went to my students and I'm like, all right, hey, I want you to think about this non-obvious newsletter. Go check that out. That's a really one of my favorite newsletters. It's awesome. It's great. Then I also sent them this announcement on design thinking. But here's a really interesting idea. What I did here too. Here I'm looking forward to tonight's class. Tonight's class is going to start to dig into design thinking. And then you notice I copied a couple aliases into my design thinking course. And I've embedded the videos in here. I wouldn't do that. But you'll see down here in my file, I've got this section I call resources folder. And again, I very quickly copied and pasted some resources from another file. But I've got like podcasts and book folders and videos and terms and themes and categories. But you'll notice down here in the videos, I've got 3 videos. One to learning with Tinderbox library, 2 on design thinking, and 2 on one on empathy. So all I did was I quickly just grabbed the aliases of those videos, copied them, and then copied those aliases up into here. And so now when I render the video, and again that image is not appearing because I've not done my pathing on the files right. When I'm rendering the video, I can just simply go and play the video right.
So
here.
with every trend that I talk,
and so what I was, and actually what was surprisingly, what really surprised about me when I was teaching the class on Thursday night was I had sent out the announcement that morning to remind all the students to watch it. But then when I was teaching the class Thursday night, I literally pulled up my Tinderbox file and I said, for those that may have not seen the video, let's watch it. And then I just dragged my Tinderbox file over onto the screen and played the video, and we sat there and watched.
And so with every trend that I talk about,
right, and we were able to watch the video. So that so this is a really nice way of having learning assets in your Tinderbox file that you can actually use while you're teaching, whether or not you're online or in person. Because if you're in person, you're on your laptop, so you can just pull it up on the screen. So I found this, having these learning assets in your file is great, keeping in mind that you want to have this idea of an asset is in one place. So my video assets are in the resource folder called video assets, and I use aliases as a means to pointing to them. So I find that to be a really effective and useful methodology. So now if I've not posted the announcement, or if it's just an idea of announcement I think I might want to do later, I'll put that announcement down here in what I call draft announcement. And so I'll just say something important, something interesting that I want to talk to them about later. I won't put a date on it because I want to deal with it later. And I use this assign to as if you're teaching multiple subjects, you could actually use the assign to designate one class section versus another class section versus all of the sections you're teaching. So that's the way I manage announcements. Any question, thoughts around that? No? Okay. The next thing is when you're teaching a class.
Michael, could you very quickly just go to one of the announcements that has a citation in it and just render that with the preview?
Sure.
Just so like.
So let me see. I actually.
All right. Okay. It doesn't.
It will work. I just got to remember what I did wrong here. Let me go here. This might, because I might not have my. let me see what's going on with my Tinderbox stamp. I don't have my preview stamps in here. Let me go. I'll pull one over here from this file and let you see it in real. I'll go here. An obvious newsletter. I think it's this one. I'll show you. Is it this one? Yeah, I've got to find a different one. Just a second. What did I do wrong here? Yeah, I broke the YAML file on this one. Yeah, I can show you the rendering. What's another file I can show you the rendering on? Just it's a great comment that you're making, and I want people to be able to see what you're talking about. So let me pull that up.
Did you say YAML?
Yeah.
Oh boy.
No, it's actually pretty. When you're using Pandoc, it's
oh, okay.
Super useful. So essentially, you can when you're leveraging a Pandoc file, you can have Tinderbox reach out and grab your. Yeah, here's a good example of it. Yeah. So here's an example of what he's referring to. So this is a report that I wrote last week. So I wrote a market assessment report last week, and you'll see scattered throughout this file. I have Chicago leveled references within the file scattered throughout. See these little 1s and 2s that are appearing, and then what's happening there, if I scroll down, is what's going on here? Just a minute. Wrong file. There you go. There you go. So if so you'll see here it's scattered throughout 1, 2, 3, 3, 4, 5. These are all citation marks. And if I scroll down, because I'm using Pandoc as a rendering engine, I'm actually able to have all of my citations automatically introduced into the file.
Wow.
Right? With all of its citation methodologies. Now, the other nice thing about that is if I come up here and I change, this is not as pretty. Sometimes I've got different methods to making this prettier. If I change it to APA instead of Chicago, you'll see instantly I've now got all APA level citation interjected into the file, and now the format is all APA. Now, what's really interesting about this, while we're on it, and Andrews, you may want to follow up with me on this later. You see how the period is in front of the citations behind the period. In APA, you want to say worldwide, in 2022 period. And in using Chicago, it's swapped. The numbered citation. Let's go back to Chicago. Right. So in Chicago format, you want the numbers of the citation after the period. So one of the beautiful things with Tinderbox is you can do text transformations. So if I go here and I apply my create a draft stamp, what Tinderbox is going to go do is go and create that draft for me automatically. And let's let it finish doing its thing. And when it's done creating that draft for me, just give it a second, it's thinking. What I can do then, and I'll show you the stamp that I wrote, is I then can apply this stamp that basically says, go into the text of the draft.
You have the power to manifest success within your workplace by working towards goals.
But on that note, by the way, I have about 50 random voices that give me somewhere between 60 attributions whenever I do something to tell me how cool I am. So that's what that was. And so you'll see here, now that it's built, I can show you what this happens. And this is really important for academic writing, or really, frankly, again, for any professional writing. So if you scroll down in the text here, we can go find all of my citations, right? And you can see here, I need the one we did today. Yeah, this one. So you can see here, I've got my different citations. Oh, the reason why it's already converted is I've actually, in my stamp, here's the fanciness of Tinderbox. I didn't actually realize I'd already gotten around to doing that. Because the style in this file is, because the style in this file is Chicago, I know that I want my citations after the period. So I'm having Tinderbox already automatically process that stamp. And so what's happening here is if you look in, say, some of these notes, and all the other thing to do, by the way, is I use highlighters to highlight my citations. So that way when I'm looking at my notes, I have my citations highlighted. So if I'm copying and pasting edits from another file, that's going to warn me to be careful not to overwrite my my citation entries.
Michael, thanks. I'm excited about that, but I don't want to interfere with.
No, I know. But let me finish. Let me finish on this last note. So what I've done here, though, is I've created a little regex stamp that basically all these 4 lines of code says move the citation on the either left side or right side of the period. And so because Tinderbox can go interrogate your text, you can both I can reverse that just as easily. So but that's a really important methodology for teaching the classes, and that's good. All right, so that's how you generate citations and manage that in the file. That's how I'm managing my announcements. And again, what's one of the nice things I like about teaching, and why I think, Anders, it's important you brought that up, is as a teacher, one of the most important things you can do is be a good example. And we get so busy as teachers, we're doing all these other things. We like our students want to cut corners. We don't want to get around to doing that. Using this methodology of inserting your citations, putting it in there, and then rendering it with Tinderbox automatically, I can now go ahead and just copy and paste my announcements into the LMS, and the citations are there, and the references are there, and it's all automated for me, and it demonstrates to the students that I'm actually a good example in eating my own dog food. And I think that's as much of an important aspect of Tinderbox as being a good teacher as not. So so far we've talked about students, we've talked about announcements. Now another big aspect of managing class is your syllabus, which is essentially what are you going to do? How are you going to teach your class? So you have your typical syllabuses, you have your welcome note, you have your instructor information, basically your contact info, your bio, your office hours, your picture, you have your course information. And now, interestingly enough, do you see this course information is actually an alias? And where that's coming from is down here. I've got another document called Pages, where I've got pages that explain my course. And so I actually want to manage my learning objectives and learning outcomes from this section of my document because that's going to go into a different part of the LMS, but I want to include it in my syllabus. And so I can manage my objectives and everything down in this one place, but those objectives are also included in the syllabus. So that's one of the ways that you can go about doing that. You can have your course prerequisites. So what are the different classes and who teaches those? And here's an interesting thing: what other teachers teach that class? So if you ever need to follow up with that, you can have that information there. You could have your class format, like how do you teach the class and how does it work? Are you going to have guest speakers involved in the class? That's another thing that you might want to do. And then the other, unlike an LMS, you can actually move elements of your structure around really easily, like I'm doing here. You can then talk about what your class materials are. We'll get out of this real quick. I'll show you this in a minute. What are your required materials? What are your optional materials? What's your textbook? Do you have a picture for your textbook? What's your communication strategy? What's the responsibilities of the instructors? What's the responsibilities you want to have from the students? How are you going to grade the students? Now, and I'll come back to this in a minute. You're going to want to have your grading policy and all of the elements of your grading policy. You're going to want to have any resources that the students may be involved in. And you're going to want to have like a holiday schedule or something like that. So your syllabus can have all of this information in it for you to be able to maintain it. Now, there's a couple interesting things that I want to point out in the way I've been managing my syllabus. Now, I didn't pull out everything because we only have 13 more minutes to talk about it. But two particular things that are particularly unique with Tinderbox that I think is really useful and helpful is one, let's go up and look at my instructor outline. So if we're looking at me, here's my info, here's my contact info, here's my bio, and here's my picture. And so you might want to ask yourself, well, how did I build this template, right? Because if I look here, I've got a picture there, I've got my office hours, and how do you build this template so that it recursively then will go ahead and display that picture? Well, here's a little trick that I just learned a couple weeks ago, which is, I wish I knew a year ago. It would have saved me countless hours of time. So let's take a look at my HTML template, and you'll see here, and I'm apologizing for the code, is like I demonstrated earlier, is I'm using this what's called a recursive include. And so essentially, as the template's interrogating the different children and or itself, and let's particularly look at the children example, as it's interrogating the children, I'm saying if the prototype equals p media, then I want you to grab this note, but then apply the template t media to this note. In other words, so let's go look at t media, and what t media says is basically grab the image file from the note and the image directory from the note and display the image. So if you look here, then let's take a look at what I'm doing with this HTML template. I'm saying process the parent note, use this file to process the children. You know, give me the title, give me the text. If it's a media file, process the children. If it's an agent and the agent type is assignment, I want you to list the children as list the children. And I'm going to come back to that in just a minute. So now if you look here and I go back up to my instructor outline, I'm able to process all this information and actually have this image show up as a image. Now look, if I have this as a, say, remember I said if you're a media file, I want you to display the image. So I'm going to change this prototype to rule or to role. You'll see I'm just getting the figure. But if I return it back to media, it's now going to pick up that that's a media file, and so therefore it will display the media file. So this is a really cool way to dynamically swap templates, or the way the content is being displayed or interjected into your template using this recursive include. It's going to take some practice because it's not just about how to write the code, it's actually wiring your brain to understand the flow of how stuff is being developed. But once you figure that out, it's really empowering. And let me show you the other place where I'm interjecting that concept. So remember when I talked about this earlier, I want to keep, so when you're writing a syllabus, you need to include in your syllabus what your assignments are from the students and and how many points that each one of those assignments are. But when you're actually writing your assignments, down here, I've got graded items. When you're actually writing your assignments, you've got a bunch of individual assignments. You maybe have some extra credit items. So let's move those down here. You maybe have some quizzes, quiz 1, quiz 2, quiz 3, final exam. You may have some discussion groups. You may have some extra projects. And so typically you would have a summary of those assignments up in your syllabus, and then you'd have the details of those assignments. For example, my final, let's go down to my group project because it's a fairly complex one. Actually, we'll go here. So you'll have, for example, details about those assignments. Let me do this so you can see it. So you'll have details about those assignments that you could be showing the students. They're like, here's how here's the steps that I want you to take to run that assignment. This information is critical, but you don't need all that detail on the syllabus. And so without a tool like Tinderbox, you're basically needing to write the title of that assignment in 2 different places. And if you change the title, you've got to go update it in 2 different places, which is a real pain, especially with someone like me that's got typos. So the strategy I figured out around that is you run agents. And so what I've done in my grading, I'm saying, hey, Tinderbox, go inside course names, graded items, individual assignments, and go get me all the individual assignments. And do that for discussions, and do that for quizzes, and do that for projects, and do that for extra credit. And then what I'm telling Tinderbox to do is, if you remember, I'm making every one of these agents their type equal assignment. So now, if you recall, if I go back down here, if you're an agent and your type is assignment, then I want you to render yourself with this list children assignments template. So now watch what happens. When I'm up here in my grading book, and I'm now in the syllabus, and I now want to render my graded items in the syllabus. It's actually going into, it's using the agent to go find all the graded items in that section, but then it's using the template to bullet those assignments and only grab the title and the point value for those notes, and then giving me point values. So that's what goes into my syllabus. So now if you watch and you look at my entire syllabus, I've got my bio, I've got my office hours, I've got my learning objectives. Again, this is being pulled from an alias. I've got all my speakers that I'm inviting to the class. I've got my textbook. I've showed you how images are being rendered using the recursive interspersed loop. And then I go down in here, and you'll see my grading is now listing each assignment and the point value that they're going to have to engage in. And that's a really, really effective way to pull information out of other parts of your Tinderbox file, introduce them into an outliner tree where you need and want that particular piece of information. In this case, I just want the note names and the and the point values for those particular assignments. But yet, when I go click through those, I can then actually go look at all of the detail for what those assignments are. So I can go down here and say open with show original note, and then I can actually say here are all my details about that assignment. So again, as a teacher, it's a really great way to efficiently manage the information that you're needing to do in front of the client and in front of the student. So that way, again, you can be managing your graded items, their point values. Because again, imagine this. How often do you do this? You create an assignment, you give it a point value, and then you realize you need to change the point value because the math's not working out, but now you forget to change it in your syllabus. So having that information be in one place, you can update that point value. I can go down here, update the point value of the quiz, change it to 5, right? So module 2 quiz is actually going to be 5. And so now if I go back and render my syllabus, we can actually see, assuming the agent updated fast enough, that the module 2 quiz is now 5 points and not 10. And then if I want to say, oh, you know what, I was actually right the first time, I want to actually make my module 2 quiz, I want to keep it as, it's up here, I want to keep it as 10 points, right? So then if I go back up and render those grades, you'll see that module 2 quiz is back to 10 points. So again, really, that's the power of Tinderbox. That's the power of attribute thinking. That's the power of templating. That's the power of leveraging agents and using action code. Other things that you want to do, as I said, if you're having a learning management system, what you're going to tend to do is have pages. So you'll have a page in your learning management system that will explain your course. So here are the pages that explain the course. You'll have pages that will, if you're breaking your class up into modules or sections, you can have ways of explaining those modules or sections. You can have a whole series of resources that you want to provide to your students, and those are other ways that you can, because again, it's this whole idea of stick the information in one place, and now in announcements you can reference those resources. In your syllabus you can reference those resources. In assignments you can reference those resources, but keep the information about those resources, particularly, for example, their URLs or their any type of information that needs to be localized for that resource. You can keep it there. Obviously, in this file, I haven't put in rubrics, and I haven't put in, like what Bill was talking about earlier, the grading methodologies, which is a video we did about a year ago. But we can start mirroring those capabilities in, and then we'll solve the grading problem that John had probably sometime this weekend, and to be able to manage those. I also create notes for myself. So, for example, when I do my students' class, I like to give them my own intro. So I answer these questions myself for them. And here's an example of my answering those questions for myself. By the way, a little side note, I don't know if anybody knows this about me, but in Obama's first presidential election, I had a text messaging startup, and I personally hand-coded Obama's ringtone website on a Thursday night at about 3 a.m. For his first election. So that's where that came from. So that was kind of a fun little thing we did on one of our clients. So you can, and so that's like my bio that I can then repurpose and reuse and my interest for a future lesson. Now, the last thing I'll point out here is, check this out, is I've also broken down all of my lectures for the 15-week class. And what I've started to do is, again, I'll have my Tinderbox file sitting next to me while I'm teaching the class. And so I'll drop an attendance. And if I add let's say that student didn't show up, well, then it goes red. So using the highlighting functionality of the Tinderbox tagging, I can say, well, if they've attended, they're green. If that person actually ended up giving me an excused absence, they went red. If that one went red, and then I could run some action code that would then automatically go up and populate. Let me go ahead and add these in. That would go ahead and populate these attributes. So then at the end of the class, at the end of the week, I could have an action code that would go through, interrogate this text, grab everybody that's A, stick it into yes, everybody that's no, stick them in no, everybody that's in excused, stick them in excused, and then run a whole set that could actually give me a report of everybody's attendance across all of the weeks. And so I've found that to be really a kind of a useful little cheat sheet methodology I have. Likewise, I have an agenda for myself between the weeks. So I put in tasks that I want to cover in that day. And if we cover it, I check it off. If we don't cover it, I move it to the next week or somewhere else. So, or if we've added a task during the class, like, task, don't forget to do X, right? So this is sitting next to me while I'm teaching. So I'm literally populating my note files while I'm doing that. Likewise, so actually what I would have done is put the that don't forget to do X down here. So here's what I plan to do for the class. Here's what we actually did and accomplished. And then while I'm talking about it, I'll start dropping in notes, just like you guys are doing in the chat. I'll ask my students to do that. I'll also be doing it myself on the side. We talked about this. We talked about that. And then we have the the materials that I want to share with the class from tonight. And so then when I'm done that, all I need to do is go up here and run my template against it. And now I've got lecture notes that I can literally just go copy and paste into the LMS. And then here's the video from that night's chat that I'm actually linking to the LMS's video. So then I actually have, within a day or so after the class, all of the notes that we talked about, and I can populate and post it into the LMS. And then you can see it, again, I'm just learning this, I'm pulling this methodology together. I'm 3 weeks into my class, but you can see by the end of 15 weeks, this is just going to get completely dialed in. I'll know exactly what we did every week. I know what tasks we had. I know what resources we had. I know what new things we interjected as questions, comments that students had, and all of that. So that gives you a high-level overview, sans the grading element of the way I've been teaching in Tinderbox. And it's exactly 10:30. So what are everybody's reactions to that?
That's amazing. When I think that often I just jot down on notes of paper what I plan to do in my classes, what I've done. I forget to follow up on points. I even promise the students I'll follow up on. This is exactly the side of thing could help me. And also the way, templates, the action code, the whole what, fantastic. This really is very insightful and very helpful session for me. So I've been battling with this very thing for many years.
Yeah, and it's going to evolve. So let's evolve it over, if we're all teaching, let's evolve this process. And again, this is literally, I hacked this particular demo file together in about 45 minutes before we joined this session. So as you saw, there were broken links, there are things going on like that. But even then, you can see, as you refine the methodology, you can just get it really dialed in. And again, the really important thing for me is this idea that, making sure that the school gets what they need in their LMS, but I don't lose the asset that is my class. And so, again, what I'll literally do is I'll just grab the export, I'll just grab this HTML, go over to the LMS, hit the HTML button on the LMS content page, paste that right in, and it works perfectly.
It's very impressive, Michael. Many thanks. I look forward to perhaps having the opportunity to look at this file or another at some point. It's I did much of that sort of elementary stuff with Scrivener, so also to have sort of various elements which are then being pulled together. But this is much more sensible. Just one side question: why is the course named after what seems to be an IBM mainframe?
Oh, the class I teach is International Business Marketing for Kyle Polley.
Okay.
And so that's why
it sounded like an old IBM mainframe.
No, it threw me for a loop for a while too. It's like, why am my class name IBM? Is IBM sponsoring the program? And then it dawned on me, oh, because the department is international business and marketing.
No, but 33, 90 something really sounded like.
Oh
sort
yeah,
of
exactly. I agree. That's welcome to the California university system. So we are a little over. Happy to hang out and talk a little bit if you guys would like. But other than that, that's what I wanted to share with you and what I've been doing in Tinderbox in the last couple weeks.
Michael, do you ever use the mapping side of Tinderbox? Because that's
I
the idea
do.
of mind mapping. Mind mapping. I've tried that in the past.
Yeah.
Didn't have great success.
Yeah, no, I use it a lot, and I use it especially for when I'm writing a report. Let me see if I give you examples of that.
Because what you're doing here is very much outline driven. It looks like
it is, but more
or
often,
centric.
Yeah, but often I'll start with. Let me pull up an example. Let's see if I can find it. A lot of the times I will start with. Here, I know I got one. Give you a good example of mind mapping that's been iterating over the last few weeks, and then we can let you guys go.
Well, he's getting that. A point for Dan to bear in mind is one is export runs off the outline. So, and all the views, when you see a map, what you're actually seeing is the contents of one outline container. One of the issues when you move from one to the other is if you've got a document that needs structure, if you want to have everything on the map, you're going to have to collapse your outline and then uncollapse it, which is perfectly possible to do. But the thing is, if the export that Michael's been showing looks overly outline centric, it's simply because that's actually how the overall process works. So in a sense, by default, Tinderbox will export its whole file except the prototypes and the templates.
Yeah.
And you can turn off the bits you don't want. Turn off the bits you don't want. Sorry, Michael, back to you.
Yeah, no worries. Here, I'm trying to find my file here that I want. I want this one.
Because when I look at this, I just get an immediate sense of overwhelm.
Well, and that's not my intention, by the way. Obviously.
No, it's not. But then it encourages me because I know this started as an idea, and you put a first note down on a page on a Tinderbox file, and then it has evolved into this beautiful thing.
So on that note, so I'll give you an example of that. So 2 years ago last week, to be precise, I sat down and was giving a gratitude note to the community, which you've all seen before, but we'll do it again. Let me find it. Yeah. So I wrote this August, I think it was August 21st, if I'm not mistaken, 2 years ago, where I said, hey, everybody, I've been Tinderboxing now for a year. You know, this is now probably a few thousand posts since then. And so this was my first mind map of the idea of the 5 C's of knowledge management, right? Where you collect, you curate, you create, you collaborate, you contribute. And over time, that's we've kept it going, but it's evolving. And like Tom and I were just discussing last week, where does discovery come into this process? You know, where does the rendering process come into place? When do you do citations versus attribution? And I had a really great conversation with Tamara about this about 2 weeks ago, where I'm like, for me, citations happen at the point of collection. I'm citing somebody else's work, whereas attribution occurs at collaboration. Right, and then the reason why I like that and use Tinderbox, unlike say other mind mapping software, is I now can go ahead and write what I mean by that. So I'm actually writing my article while I'm writing my mind maps. Right, and so that way my articles and my maps are working. Now, where this falls apart is the way Mark Anderson was just talking about. If I were to make this attribution into the collaboration as a child. It falls off the view of the mind map, but it's in the way I want it in the outline. So you've got to be careful that because if I were to do if I'm looking at this, if I were to do this, that idea of attribution is now nested under contribution in the outline, but I can't really see it in the map view. So the way I would manage that in this context is I would go like this. And that would remind me that attribution is part of collaboration. And I might likewise say citation is part of collection. And so that way I kind of open it up a little bit. So in the map view, I can actually see the item, but in the outline view, it's being managed as a nested item within the outline view.
I really appreciate how you make things atomic and then build on those. So they top down build versus and the bottom up build. It looks like you're.
Well, I'm kind of doing the both ways. I'm coming top down, I'm going to bottom up, and I'm meeting in the middle. And that's where that metacognition, attribute thinking, this is not something naturally inherent in me, because I tend to be on the very hyper extroverted creative side, and Tinderbox has allowed me to kind of manage those other muscle elements that I would have never had before. Right? So here you see I've now got attribution built in there, and if I pop now over to the outline, you'll see that up here in the 5C structure, we now have content, attributes. Where is which file is it? Other tools inbox. I can't remember. Where is it? Oh, here, 5C's knowledge. Yeah, it's in this one. Oh, it's in the README. I'll find it somewhere in this file. Oh, here it is. Here it is. You'll see that collection, attribution is now buried within the collaboration. So that kind of shows you how these two elements work, and that should probably go up here. Right?
Punctuation error.
Where? Sorry? Somebody find an error for me to fix?
I thought that was your own voice.
That was
recording.
No.
Might have been would a chat message lapse over into if it happens on my machine, it's gonna lapse over and be picked up by you guys. But anyway, Michael, I forgot to ask you. But anyway, this is brilliant.
Yeah. Well, thank you. Well, so that's what I wanted to go over today. I hope you guys enjoyed that, got value from it.
Michael, this is Bruce. Had breakfast and all that. I just popped in for the end. Looks like you were, looks like you created something very powerful. I just want to remind you were someone to save chat. I can't save it because I came in at the end.
Yep.
So someone to save it.
I'm an inveterate chat saver.
All right.
And thanks to Michael, I'm able to get the chat and then explode. That's my favorite word for Tinderbox.
Explode is a good thing.
Yeah. It gets people's attention. What did you do today? I blew things up.
Nice. Okay. Well, thank you, everybody, and we'll see you next week.
Thank you all.
Bye.
Brilliant.
Outstanding, Michael. Just so much good and helpful information.
Yeah, my pleasure. I'm glad you guys enjoyed it. All
Michael,
right.
very quick. People asked if you're going to post the file.
I'll try to post part of it. I don't know how much of it I post. I got to sanitize it, make sure I don't have student information in it. So I'll go through and see what we can post.
Hey, Michael.
Yes, sir.
I threw a bunch of notes into the chat as per your request.
Thanks.
Let me know if that was effective.
Yes.
If that's useful to you or not.
I appreciate that. Yes, for sure.
Or just an irritation to everybody else watching the chat session.
No, I think it'll be good. I think it'll be great. All right. Any other thoughts? I also too, just for future classes or any details on this. Now that let's help try to. I just try to make up what we were going to talk about on some of these weekends. If you have any particular thing you want to do a deep dive in, let us know and we can schedule that.
I think for me, a lot of it is your use of templates is obviously an important issue for me that I've learned a lot about this week.
Awesome. Yeah, templates are critical. That's the structure part.
Yep, exactly. So thank you.
Yeah, absolutely. All right, everybody. Thanks. Take it easy.
Thanks.
Bye.